did not stumble upon these words by random scroll or idle chance. Something, almost imperceptible yet unmistakably alive, guided your eyes here at precisely this hour. Perhaps nothing visible has changed. The morning coffee still steams. Emails still queue like obedient soldiers. Loved ones still expect your practiced smile. Yet, beneath the rehearsed motions, a hush gathers, a hull that polite conversation cannot fill. You might feel it as the moment you wake in the grey light before dawn, staring at the ceiling while an unspoken question hums in your chest. You might sense it driving home after another achievement, when the applause fades and the silence inside grows louder than the road. This emptiness is not confusion. It is the first murmur of awakening, the universe tapping the glass of your ordinary life and asking if you are ready to see through it. Carl Jung wrote that every genuine transformation begins when the outer frame cracks and an inner voice you have postponed for years finally whispers its name. That voice may arrive as restlessness, as a sudden transparency in things once solid, as the faint but certain feeling that your story is no longer authored solely by habit. Midlife often amplifies this call. Decades of effort have built a respectable existence, yet somewhere you sense the architecture is missing a foundation only the soul can lay. You are not failing, you are being summoned. And if this is truly the universe speaking, then stillness is how you answer. In the pause between thoughts, you will notice subtle rearrangements. A book title that glows on the shelf, a memory that resurfaces with new meaning, a stranger's remark that sounds like a line from your own hidden diary. Each is a knock on the inner door you once bolted shut for safety. So breathe for a moment and feel the quiet expanding behind your ribs. That spaciousness is not a void to fear. It is an opening into which a larger life wants to pour. We are about to step across the threshold together, exploring how silence, presence, and a shift in perception can rewrite the fabric of reality. Keep listening. The next section will show why the softest voice within you holds the strongest key. The great hurdle of awakening is not a lack of effort, but an excess of noise. We live in a century that worships velocity, yet consciousness ripens only in stillness. Think of Laura, a 53-year-old architect whose calendar glimmered with accolades. She managed teams, balanced budgets, raised 2 children, and even squeezed in half marathons at dawn. Then one autumn afternoon, her body collapsed into a migraine so fierce she could not tolerate light. Curtains drawn, she lay in a hush so complete she could hear her own pulse. At first, the silence felt like exile. Emails piled up, clients grew restless, and familiar thoughts galloped through her mind, demanding solutions. But something surprising followed the discomfort, a widening of inner space, as if someone had opened a window inside her skull and let a breeze wander through rooms she had forgotten existed. Days later, rereading a passage from a design journal she had skimmed a dozen times, she suddenly saw it differently. The sentence seemed to glow, revealing an insight about harmony between human dwellings and the living earth that redirected her entire career towards sustainable architecture. The words had not changed. Her state of being had. Carl Jung would say Laura stumbled into a chamber of the psyche where the ego's tight grip relaxes and deeper currents can surface. Awareness does not break doors, it waits for locks to dissolve. The migraine, unwelcome as it was, became a spiritual scalpel, cutting through layers of urgency until only presence remained. In that suspension, she tasted what the mystics call the still point, the silent seam where the inner and outer worlds cross-pollinate. Here, perception recalibrates, not because we gather more facts, but because we shed the clamor that distorts them. The mind, no longer an anxious searchlight, becomes a clear pond, reflecting what has always been there. This principle is as counterintuitive as it is liberating. You do not force revelation, you make room for it. Gardeners understand that seeds sprout not by being pulled upward, but by resting in dark soil while unseen chemistry unfolds. Likewise, the psyche opens when we cease wrestling for answers and allow not knowing to cradle us. The moment we stop rehearsing our identity, subtle impressions emerge. A half-remembered dream finishes its sentence. A long-ignored feeling names itself. Even grief, when granted quiet, reshapes into wisdom, as naturally as winter snow melts into spring rivers. Laura's turning point arrived when she realized her real task was not to conquer the silence, but to cooperate with it. She began each morning sitting on her porch before dawn, letting the world awaken around her, without immediately corralling it into plans. The first week felt pointless. Her mind tried to make to-do lists. By the second week, she noticed birdsong she had never truly heard. By the third, ideas flowed without strain, as if the universe itself were drafting blueprints inside her. Projects that once required sleepless nights now emerged with graceful efficiency. Colleagues remarked that she seemed brighter, younger, though she had done nothing outwardly different except practice stillness. Such stories may sound like gentle miracles, but they point to a universal mechanism. When we surrender the urge to dictate reality, consciousness adjusts its lens, and the ordinary scene reveals deeper hues. Countless readers describe that moment when a familiar book suddenly clicks, as the psyche signaling it has reached a new frequency. The text serves as a mirror. What shifts is the light within the reader. Burnout, heartbreak, or enforced rest often provide the catalytic hush. Yet we need not wait for crisis. We can court silence intentionally, trusting that life's most subtle guidance flows through the quiet channels, not the loud ones. And in that stillness, we begin to perceive a startling truth. Reality is not a fixed stage of props and scripts handed to us. It is a living canvas we have been painting with every breath, every belief, every unspoken emotion. The colors at first seem faint, but as presence deepens, we notice how swiftly they respond to the touch of our awareness. A single sincere breath can soften resentment. A brief immersion in gratitude can tint an entire afternoon with warmth. What we call circumstances are, in part, brushstrokes of inner weather projected outward. Anyone who has emerged from the fog of exhaustion, grief, or enforced solitude knows the sensation. One day, the world feels bleached and brittle. The next, it shimmers with hidden depth, though the sidewalks and headlines remain unchanged. The difference is resonance. Having tasted that alchemy, we recognize stillness not as idleness, but as an instrument tuned to the frequency of insight. It is the gap through which the universe speaks in the only language it knows, the language of direct experience. So let us pause together at this threshold, remembering Laura's darkened room and the gentle dawn that followed. The silence you fear is not emptiness. It is a doorway into unfettered seeing. Step through, and the narrative you call your life may reveal itself as a conversation you have been co-authoring all along. In the next breath, we will explore how this living canvas responds to the hues of your inner frequency, and why every encounter henceforth becomes a mirror of what you choose to carry within. The first time Daniel noticed the pattern, he was standing alone in a grocery store aisle staring at a row of cereal boxes, his divorce papers still warm in the glove compartment of his car. The neon lights trembled above him, and he felt an almost physical echo of the emptiness that had followed him from childhood living rooms to college dorms to executive boardrooms. In that instant, the aisle became less a place of breakfast choices and more a hall of mirrors, each glossy package reflecting not what he wanted, but what he was carrying. A deep conviction that he did not deserve to be chosen. Months earlier, he had discovered meditation, and with it the hush we explored in the last section. Yet, silence alone had not unraveled the fabric of reality that kept reweaving the same ache. Jung would have called the scene archetypal, the abandoned child standing before 100 brightly colored promises, none of which could fill the cavity inside. But it was the work of Mexican psychologist Jacobo Greenberg that finally pierced Daniel's confusion. Greenberg taught that we move through a formational matrix, a living tapestry that responds to our interior frequency as faithfully as water responds to the shape of its vessel. Fear tightens the weave, inviting knots of chaos. Clarity loosens it into patterns of synchronicity. Daniel realized that while he paid lip service to worthiness, his energetic signature still hummed with the low note of self-rejection, and the matrix answered by sending partners, employers, even chance encounters that mirrored this vibration back to him. That understanding was at first excruciating because it stripped away the comfort of blaming fate. Yet pain became instruction. He began to observe how quickly the outer world shifted in micro ways when his inner tone altered by even a single degree. On mornings when he surfaced from meditation, feeling spacious, traffic lights synchronized effortlessly, meetings ended early, and strangers offered small kindnesses, unprompted. On afternoons when he slipped into the old frequency of unworthiness, technology glitch, criticism arrived, and conversations soured. The evidence mounted until it was undeniable. Reality was not punishing him, it was calibrating him. In one particularly stark episode, Daniel met a potential client who spoke with the exact intonation his father had used when belittling him as a boy. His chest clenched, and for a moment he prepared to shrink into acquiescence. Then he remembered the matrix. He deliberately slowed his breathing, summoned the felt sense of inherent value he had touched in silent dawns, and spoke from that place. The client's posture relaxed visibly, his tone softened, and the negotiation unfolded with unexpected mutual respect. Daniel left the meeting trembling, not from anxiety, but from the revelation that he had just altered the script of reality by altering the vibration of his presence. Here lies the psychological fulcrum. We do not attract what we want, we attract what we are willing to feel as already real. The matrix is impartial, like a cosmic 3D printer reading the blueprints of our subconscious. If the design is laced with covert shame, it prints relationships that reinforce that contour. If the design is revised with embodied acceptance, it prints encounters that honor that shape. The shift is subtle yet seismic, and it explains why cycles repeat until the belief beneath them is retuned. Grindel's research showed paranormal-sounding effects in laboratory settings, but Jung intuited the same principle in symbolic form. Every outer figure is an inner figure wearing a costume. Daniel's serial isle revelation then was not random. It was his psyche staging a play in public space to expose an old frequency still running the show. The turning point came one winter evening when he stood on his balcony watching snow swirl under an orange street lamp. He felt the familiar hollow ache rise, but instead of numbing it with work or scrolling, he addressed it directly. "If you are my frequency, speak." A wave of grief surfaced. Memories of a mother lost to illness when he was 8, a father too overwhelmed to offer warmth. As he allowed the sorrow to expand without resistance, the city seemed to quiet in solidarity. In that raw permission, something shifted. He sensed not just the pain, but the innocence beneath it. An unbroken wholeness that had never actually been erased. The grief did not vanish, but its charge dissolved, and with it the echo weaponized by the matrix. Days later, he began attracting conversations with people who treated him as a peer rather than a subordinate. And a new romance emerged that did not demand the abandonment of self. Daniel had not forced life to comply. He had returned his inner instrument, and the orchestra responded. When you realize you are continually weaving this energy field, you begin to look around, and suddenly every face, every delay, every unexpected kindness becomes a mirror. Some mirrors show fragments you have healed. Others reveal frequencies still entangled in old static. This recognition is not a reason for self-blame. It is the birthplace of creative power. For if reality is pliable, then each breath, each thought, each felt conviction becomes a brushstroke on the canvas of fate. In the next movement of our journey, we will polish the mirror of relationship, exploring how those closest to us, especially after midlife, speak the most uncompromising truths of the soul, inviting us to refine the frequency we project and, in doing so, transform the world that answers us. There comes a season, often after 40, when the faces around you begin to behave like polished silver, throwing back not simply smiles or frowns, but the hidden architecture of your own psyche. It can feel unsettling at first. as though the universe has rewired the stage lighting, and every glance now exposes more than you intended to reveal. Yet, within this brightness, lies a profound invitation. Consider Eleanor, a once celebrated architect who, after decades of sculpting skylines, found herself increasingly irritated by her younger colleague Leo. He arrived at meetings brimming with bold ideas, arguing for organic curves where she preferred angles, insisting that buildings should breathe rather than dominate. She judged him impetuous, even disrespectful, until a quiet Sunday morning dismantled her frustration. While rearranging boxes in her attic, she discovered the sketchbook she had carried through university, its pages alive with daring designs she had abandoned once clients and safer paychecks demanded predictability. The confrontation was immediate. Leo's audacity was the echo of her own forsaken daring. She realized that her irritation was not toward him, but toward the part of herself that had been exiled when security eclipsed imagination. In a moment of breath-held humility, Eleanor saw the mirror. Jung wrote that the relationship is the royal road to individuation because it exposes the shadow with unwavering precision. The disrespect you perceive may be your own unclaimed anger at self-betrayal. The praise you receive may highlight a virtue you have yet to embrace openly. In Elena's case, the mirror did not shame, it beckoned. The following week, she invited Leo for coffee, confessing her long-buried sketches. Instead of gloating, he listened with wide, kind eyes and asked if she would join him on a daring new project. Accepting meant stepping outside the fortress of reputation she had built, risking critique and late-night revisions that quickened her pulse like a first love. Yet as she said yes, an inner click reverberated, the matrix rearranging again, this time to reflect her reclaimed vitality. The transformation was not a cinematic montage of effortless triumphs. It was a series of pulses, each relationship offering feedback. Her teenage daughter, who often accused Eleanor of never being present, suddenly began sharing journal entries once Eleanor started leaving her phone in the car during their weekly dinners. It was as though the universe was affirming, align within and connection without will realign. Friends who thrived on nostalgic complaints drifted gently to the periphery, making space for new companions whose conversations felt like sunrise. The loss stung, yet its message was unambiguous. Old frequencies cannot follow you into new rooms. Here, the psychological challenge becomes a spiritual practice, to meet every interaction with the curiosity of an artist studying light on water. The colleague who interrupts may be showing you where you still undervalue your own voice. The lover who withdraws when you grow may be illustrating the cost of remaining in spaces too small for your unfolding. None of this renders the other person villainous. It renders them revelatory. The task is not to shatter the mirror in outrage, but to polish it with tenderness, wiping away the dust of outdated beliefs. I must be needed to be loved. I'm too old to start again. Conflict means failure, so that what reflects back is neither distortion nor projection, but lucid self-recognition. The turning point arrives when you shift from asking, "Why is this happening to me?" to "What aspect of me is being revealed through this?" In that pivot, self-worth is reclaimed, not as an abstraction, but as an embodied frequency. Elena felt it one twilight when the building she and Leo designed lifted into the skyline, a structure of curves and glass that seemed to inhale dusk and exhale possibility. Standing beneath its newly lit facade, she sensed the resonance of an inner boundary restored, no longer permitting collaborations that shrank her vision, no longer silencing the pulse of original longing. The relationship mirror had not only shown her the forgotten artist, it had dared her to live as that artist again. To see clearly in the mirror, then, is to recognize that every facet of human connection is a message, personalized yet universal, urging us toward coherence. It is to welcome the discomfort of reflection as evidence that the psyche longs to integrate what has been split. And as you polish these mirrors, through honest dialogue, through the courage to release misaligned ties, through the willingness to let admiration land without deflection, you discover that relationships are less about finding completion in another and more about witnessing your own becoming in real time. In our next step, we will examine how stripping away the remaining veils of inherited identity allows the light you have rediscovered to shine without obstruction, revealing not just who you are, but who you have always been beneath the dust. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the greatest illusion you must face is not the world outside, but the mask you have mistaken for your face. You may have worn it for so long that its weight feels like identity. You call yourself strong because you never cried when you were abandoned. You call yourself logical because feelings were once dismissed in your childhood home. You call yourself independent because you learned early that asking for help meant disappointment. But beneath these polished titles lies something much more sacred. The part of you that remembers softness before it became dangerous, joy before it became conditional, truth before it had to be filtered. The veils we wear are not just emotional habits, they are survival relics, stitched together from years of needing to belong, to be safe, to be enough. Camille, now 48, once wore her competence like a crown. She managed a thriving real estate business, raised 2 sons after divorce, and never missed a deadline. People called her unstoppable, and she played the role so well that even her tears waited for midnight to fall. But one winter evening, alone in her car outside the grocery store, a holiday commercial flickered on the radio. A child running into a parent's arms, and something cracked. Her breath caught, her chest tightened, and a flood of uncried years rose without permission. She sat there in the dark, hands frozen on the steering wheel, as an ache she couldn't name curled through her body like smoke. That moment was not a breakdown, it was a break open. The veil of invincibility, long admired by others, had suffocated her spirit for decades. In the weeks that followed, Camille did something she hadn't done in years. She stopped performing. She let herself sleep late. She cancelled a business trip and told the truth. I'm exhausted. She admitted to her sister that she missed being touched, not out of neediness, but out of human truth. And for the first time in years, she began journaling. Not about her goals or finances, but about the night her father forgot to pick her up after ballet, and how she waited on the steps until the janitor found her. That forgotten scene, buried under achievement and grit, had birthed the girl who vowed never to depend on anyone again. Naming it, writing it, feeling it, this was the quiet act of removing the veil. Her independence had never been wrong, but it had never been whole. It had been a fortress with no door. Psychologically, this is the point where persona and shadow intersect. The persona is the mask we craft to meet the world, the version of us that wins approval and avoids shame. But the shadow is what gets pushed into the attic when that mask becomes too tight. For Camille, strength had been her mask, but beneath it was grief, softness, and a forgotten tenderness that wanted to be seen without being judged. When we lift these veils, we often fear collapse, but what actually happens is clarity. The light we've been seeking doesn't pour in from outside. It rises from within, from the place we've kept hidden in order to be accepted. The turning point for Camille came not in grand epiphanies, but in one quiet evening when she let herself laugh until she cried with a friend over dinner. There was no need to impress, no business card exchanged, no curated perfection. Just presence. In that moment, she realized something profound. Being real was not a risk. It was a relief. And that relief became a new kind of freedom. Not the brittle independence of self-containment, but the fluid strength of authenticity. She no longer needed to uphold a performance to be worthy of connection. She simply had to show up without armor. This is the invitation the universe offers when the veils begin to fall. To stop confusing survival with identity, to remember the essence beneath the roles, and to allow your truth, not your polish, to guide your life. Yes, it costs comfort. Yes, it dismantles what once earned praise. But in its place arises something radiant. And when that final veil dissolves, there is no need to seek the light. You realize you are the light, and have always been. In the next part of this unfolding, we'll explore what happens when you stop waiting for signs and instead become the signal. when the universe stops being something you chase and starts becoming something you co-create. There is a decisive shift that happens after the last veil falls. At first, it feels like standing in a room where the walls have quietly dissolved. There is no thunder, only a sudden spaciousness. The familiar instinct is to rush out and fill that space with plans, goals, proof that you still have your hands on the steering wheel. Yet something wiser rises in the silence and reminds you that creation does not begin with grasping, but with attunement. Carl Jung called this movement toward attunement coincidence laden with meaning, the moment psyche and world lean toward each other until they breathe in rhythm. In ordinary language, we call it flow. In spiritual language, we call it grace. Either way, it is not commanded, it is invited by coherence between inner state and outer field. Nathan, a 51-year-old architect, discovered this after a year in which every outer marker of success collapsed. His firm downsized, his marriage ended, and his doctor warned him that stress had turned his heart into a ticking clock. One rainy afternoon, he wandered into a botanical garden to escape the noise of his thoughts. There, among orchids dripping with quiet, he noticed a slender fern unfurling in slow motion. Something about its effortless opening struck him harder than any boardroom revelation. He realized that for decades he had been forcing himself to bloom on schedule, while life itself unfolded by resonance, light meeting leaf, water meeting root, timing guided not by will but by harmony. That evening, he wrote a single line in his journal: "I will let life lead, and I will meet it with readiness." In the weeks that followed, Nathan began treating each dawn as an unspoken agreement. Instead of scanning his phone for emergencies, he listened for the subtle yes or no inside his chest before choosing his first act. Some mornings, the yes led him to a park bench where strangers happened to share stories that mirrored his own doubts, handing him insights he hadn't known he needed. Other days, the yes nudged him to revisit abandoned sketches of sustainable homes he once believed the market would reject. He worked on them quietly, not as a desperate pitch, but as a dialogue with possibility. 3 months later, a former client called out of the blue. She had purchased rural land and wanted an eco-conscious retreat center. She had no idea Nathan was sketching the very thing she described. The synchronicity felt uncanny, yet completely natural. Like that fern, responding to spring without sending memos to the sun. Psychologically, what shifted was not luck, but frequency. Nathan stopped broadcasting anxiety and scarcity, signals that previously summoned chaotic projects and draining relationships. By anchoring himself in presence each morning, he began emitting an energy of calm innovation. The outer matrix, Grinberg's term for the responsive field of reality, simply mirrored what he had become. We call this the law of resonance. Life listens beneath our words and arranges itself according to the music of our states. When those states are conflicted, the melody is discordant. When they are coherent, the world harmonizes. The climax of Nathan's story arrived on an evening when he presented his retreat designs to a circle of investors. Midway through his slideshow, the power in the small conference hall flickered and went dark. In the hush that followed, old reflexes of panic stirred. But instead of tightening, Nathan breathed, grounded himself, and began describing the project from memory, painting the image with his voice. He spoke of buildings shaped to catch sunrise, of solar roofs that glowed like lanterns at dusk, of rainwater singing through bamboo channels. The investors, listening in candlelight, felt the vision more vividly than any rendering could convey. Minutes later, the lights returned, and one of them said, "We saw enough." Funding was secured on the spot. Nathan later told a friend, "It was as if the universe flipped the switch to ask if I would trust the dark. The moment I did, the room lit itself." This is what co-creating the dawn looks like. It is not a magician's trick, nor a rigid formula of positive thinking. It is the lived realization that the universe is a duet partner, not a vending machine. When you embody the qualities you seek, peace, clarity, generosity, the field around you rearranges with elegant precision. The most ordinary encounters become collaborations with an unseen intelligence. You stop begging for signs because every breath becomes one. The philosophical realization is simple yet seismic. Reality is less a screenplay to memorize and more a jazz piece to improvise. The sheet music provides structure, but the soul adds cadence, and the cosmos responds in kind. Once you feel this interplay, overthinking loses its throne. You trade anxious prediction for faithful participation. Like Nathan before the blackout, you learn to trust that when the lights dim, your inner coherence will illuminate the next note. And in that trust, the dawn you once chased begins rising from within, painting the horizon of your life in colors that match the true frequency of your becoming. So the pilgrimage comes to rest in a place that was never elsewhere, but always beneath your ribs, waiting to be noticed, like a lamp hidden behind gauze. You have walked the spiral from restless questioning to still communion, from chasing omens in the sky to feeling constellations pulse in your own bloodstream. Along the way, old scaffolding fell, roles collapsed, veils slipped, and each collapse sounded like loss, until you realized the rubble was only outgrown armor. What remains is a naked glow, quieter than triumph and stronger than certainty, the steady radiance of a self that no longer asks permission to exist. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The deeper secret is that becoming is less an ascent than a settling. The moment the stirred water clears and the moon discovers herself mirrored in the pond. Carry this. Nothing essential can be earned or revoked. It can only be remembered. The universe responds to remembrance, the way dawn answers the horizon, inevitably, without negotiation. When you rest in that remembrance, you stop bargaining with life and start conversing with it. Choices feel less like forks in the road and more like notes in a melody that has been guiding you since before memory. Even your scars become illuminated parchment where purpose has inscribed its earliest drafts. You see now that every apparent detour was a compass adjustment, every heartbreak a doorway through which a larger breath could enter. So, when the world tilts again, as it surely will, place a hand over your heart and feel the original light pulsing there. Let that pulse be your metronome. Walk into the day as if it was soft clay, and your footsteps were prayers shaping it. Speak only what carries warmth. Meet the eyes of strangers long enough to recognize the shared ember. And when night falls, sit beneath the silence until you can hear the quiet singing inside matter itself. A lullaby that sounds uncannily like your own name. You are not here to seek brilliance. You are here to remember that you have never been anything less than luminous. Step gently, shine anyway, and watch the path unfold in gold where your shadow once led. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this, when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.